Chapter 7. Whoosh. Jessie woke to an awful sound of rushing water. She remembered learning about the Niagara Falls in geography. Was this what they sounded like? Confused by the noise, at first Jessie couldn't remember where she was and why she wasn't sleeping cozily in the bed she shared with Hannah. Her whole body ached from trying to balance on the white porcelain chair, the toilet, all night. She wondered if it was safe to move yet. The room was as bright as midday, but Jessie couldn't see any windows. So it was those globe things again, putting out more light than Jessie had ever seen from a candle or a lamp. Even though the lights had almost led to her capture the night before, now that she was safe, she decided once again that they were incredible. Heather, is that the ring Jason gave you? Yeah, like it? The voices came from in front of Jessie's little metal stall. She was so eager to see what real 1996 girls looked like that she knocked her elbow against the back of her toilet getting up. This time, the sound came from her toilet. The water swirled powerfully, then disappeared. In a few moments, more came pouring in from the back. Jessie watched it in amazement and felt the pipes that led to the wall. So that was why the toilet hole wasn't very deep. But where did the water go? Jessie decided it was too much of a mystery, so she went to the door she fastened so carefully the night before. Through a crack, she could see three girls standing before a mirror. One had her hand held out for the other two to see. All three girls had hair as wild as Jessie's, and Jessie grinned. Her hair fitted in without having to do a thing with it. For the first time, she could remember she could get up in the morning without trying to braid her hair. Jessie tried to see what the girls were wearing to compare with her own clothes, but it was hard to tell through the narrow crack. And while Jessie was peering out, the girls finally finished admiring Heather's ring and left. Jessie wanted to follow them, but first she wanted to find an outhouse. She started to unfasten her door, then remembered she didn't have to. Minutes later, she pushed the whoosh lever and felt quite proud that she figured out 1996. Finally stepping out of her stall, Jessie faced the mirror. It was enormous, stretching the entire length of the wall, and unlike all the mirrors in Clifton, it was clear and undistorted. For the first time in her life, Jessie saw herself without waves and lines and blotches, half fearing this might be another mirror people watched through. Jessie still stared in fascination, her dark hair unbraided, swirling all over her head like a cloud. Digging through the bag Mom had given her, Jessie pulled out a wooden comb and began yanking it through her tangles. She went slowly, preoccupied with gazing in the mirror. Her eyes, she saw for the first time, were exactly the same as her paws in sunlight, greenish with flecks of hazel, but hers was impatient, curious. She had never seen his look that way. Standing back far enough to see her jacket and jeans, Jessie examined herself carefully so she would be able to compare herself with the real 1996 people. The coat Mon called a windbreaker was kind of pretty, even though it looked boyish. She unzipped it far enough to see the thing Mon called a t-shirt. It was yellow and had a huge black circle imprinted on it with a line and two dots inside. It sort of looked like a smiling face, maybe on some stick figure Katie or one of the other little children drew in the dust. While Jessie was staring at herself, she heard another whoosh, and a girl stepped out from the other bathroom stalls. Jessie pretended to concentrate on combing her hair, but watched the girl carefully. She had fluffy blonde hair that stood straight out from the sides of her face, almost as though it had been frozen in the wind. Her pants were the things Mom called blue jeans, but they were faded and much tighter than Jessie's, and her purple flowered top looked nothing like Jessie's t-shirt. Patting her hair, the girl stepped into a counter in front of the mirror and turned a knob. Water gushed out of a shiny metal loop. Never seen anybody wash their hands before? The girl asked. Jessie didn't know what to say. Could the girl tell Jessie wasn't used to the 20th century? Would she summons the guards? Before Jessie could come up with a good answer, the girl shrugged, pulled a sheet of paper out of the nearby counter, wiped off her hands and threw the paper into a can. Then she left, as though she didn't care why Jessie had been staring. Jessie didn't think the girl was going to tell anyone about her. Still, she decided she'd better leave the bathroom. But first, she tried turning the same knob, and again water came pouring out. What a place this world outside Clifton was. After following the same ritual as the girl before her, even throwing away the paper, as crazy as that seemed, Jessie stepped out into the giant room she'd been in the night before. The largest room Jessie had ever seen before this one was Seward's store, and it was always crowded with spices, cloth, barrels, and everything else Clifton needed. Only 5 or 6 people could fit inside comfortably at one time. This room was open and airy with glass in the ceiling that let in bright sunlight. About the only furniture was a cluster of tables and chairs at the other end, where the guards had had coffee the night before. but the room was hardly empty. It was packed with people, maybe 200. Jessie calculated in amazement, more than in all of Clifton, and many of them appeared to be about Jessie's age. They sat along the walls, milled around in the open areas, moved over the tables. Anxious to fit in, Jessie couldn't help staring as she stared at the girl in the bathroom. Many of the other children wore blue jeans, but some jeans were darker blue than Jessie's and some were faded almost white. Some were loose. It seemed miraculously that they didn't fall off. Jessie thought maybe her jeans looked okay. The other children's shirts and jackets were very different, though, many with bright patterns that almost glowed. Jessie's top definitely stood out, but no one else seemed to notice. No one looked at Jessie at all. The other children were too busy talking, laughing, and even screaming. And then he goes, "Who are you going out with tonight?" And we were at the mall, and then Jessie had never heard so many voices at once. It hurt her ears. It would be easy to leave unnoticed, she decided. But she leaned against the wall for a minute longer, trying to get used to all the noise. "Kids, come on, it's your turn for the tour." Jessie turned and saw a woman about her mother's age, dressed in brown pants like a man. She was talking to the group around Jessie. Jessie noticed that the girl called Heather was right beside her. Most of the others got up, but Heather and her friends still sat. Jessie decided to wait a minute before leaving. "Oh no, you guys too," the woman said. Heather and the other two stood up, complaining. The woman looked at Jessie. "Why aren't you coming? Do you expect me to carry you?" But Jessie started. The woman thought she was with the other girls. But the woman was glaring like Mr. Smith always did before he said, "Do you want a whipping?" Jessie looked around. She didn't see any guards, but they might be just around the corner. What if the woman yelled for one? What if the woman started asking just where Jessie belonged? What if Clifton's men found out where she was? Jessie tried to look innocent. "I'm coming, ma'am," she said. The woman gave Jessie a surprised look, but Jessie followed along, looking meekly at the ground. It appeared she was going to be one of those called tourists. Chapter 8. The woman who had hurled Jessie and the others together walked right behind Jessie, so there was no chance to break off and escape. "Teenagers," the woman snorted. The word sounded vaguely familiar to Jessie. She thought it might be like okay and shut up, another word from the future not allowed in Clifton. But why did the woman say it so angrily? Jessie gave up wondering and looked around. They were heading down the same corridor Jessie had creeped through the night before. But in the bright light from those miraculous glass globes, now Jessie noticed pictures on the wall. Moving slowly towards them, Jessie saw that they weren't paintings or drawings, but something else. Something that seemed to capture scenes just as someone might see them. They were incredible. How could such pictures exist? Jessie remembered Mr. Smith telling the school about a new invention called DAG type, but she only half believed him. It sounded crazy that someone's image could be captured like that. And of course, she never actually see a DAG type. The first one in the United States had been taken only the year before in 1839. Maybe that's what these were. Why? Suddenly, Jessie realized how silly she was being. Everyone else walked by the pictures as though they were nothing. The rest of the world had seen hundreds of these DAG types, probably. She had to remember this was 1996, not 1840. Then Jessie noticed all these scenes were from Clifton. Mrs. Harlow cooking over open fireplace, Mrs. Seward measuring out a poke of flour for Mrs. Ruddle, Mr. Smith looking stern as the school children stood and recited. And yes, Jessie was in that picture, in the 5th grade row. She looked younger, but it was definitely her. Jessie looked around, waiting to tell someone how strange it was to see herself as she looked 2 years ago, but she couldn't. That was the last thing she should tell anyone. Remembering the danger, Jessie moved away from the pictures. She tried to walk in the center of the group, cautiously, so no one would catch her staring. She looked around at the others, and she got another jolt. A few of the children, she discovered, were actually Negroes. At least their faces and hands were a shade or two darker than Jessie's. Some of them had curly hair, but others' hair was straight. Jessie had never seen a Negro, and she was disappointed that their skin wasn't pure black and their hair pure curls, as she's always heard. Jessie didn't think they could be slaves because they act just like the other children. Maybe the abolitionists in Clifton had gotten their wish and there wasn't slavery anymore. Time the group was beyond the door Jessie had come through the night before. A bit farther down the hall, Jessie saw a woman wearing a long dress, apron, and bonnet. It made Jessie feel better to see someone dressed like that. But the woman wasn't from Clifton. The group of children reached the woman and she motioned for them to stop. "Good morning," she said, a little too cheerfully. Welcome to Clifton. My name is Mrs. Spurring, and I'm going to be your tour guide today. I understand you've come on a school trip from. She looked at a card in her hand. Oakdale Junior High School. Some of the children mumbled, yes. Any adult in Clifton would have reprimanded the children and ordered them to say yes, ma'am, promptly and crisply. But this Mrs. Sparling only smiled. Well, we have quite a treat for you today. This will be like going back in a time machine. When you left for school this morning, it was 1996. Here it's 1840. The people here live without TVs, VCRs, stereos, refrigerators, freezers, or even running water. How do they survive? One boy with spiky yellow hair asked. Several around him laughed. They've survived just like many of your ancestors did. Some would say they live better than you because they aren't weighed down by your possessions. I doubt it, the boy said. The others laughed again. Mrs. Spurring forced a smile. Why don't you wait and see? She continued speaking dully, as though she said the same words many times before. She sounded like Mr. Smith when he repeated poetry at school, but Mrs. Spurring was describing the history of Clifton as Ma had the night before. Mrs. Spurring kept calling it Clifton Village. Do the people here really think it's 1840? She looked really smart. So Mr. Whittingham was wrong when he said Negroes couldn't think like white people. Jessie listened carefully to Mrs. Spurling's answer. Oh, these people aren't crazy, Mrs. Spurling said with a laugh. Only the youngest children think it's 1840. All the others are let in on Clifton Village's little secret as soon as they are old enough to understand. No one speaks of it, though, because they are happy here, and they do get benefits of the 21st century, medical care, for example. It would be inhumane to let anyone die of diseases that many died of back then when antibiotics are available. But that's not, Jessie started to protest. And Jessie realized she couldn't call this woman a liar. Not now. No one would believe her. That's not authentic, Jessie finished lamely. She cleared her throat. I'm not saying I want anyone to die, but how do we know this is really what 1840s was like? Now, that's a good question. Isn't it, children? Mrs. Spurling said with a sticky, sweet tone. She seemed to be making fun of Jessie. We could never be 100% sure, and things like 21st century medical care will always make Clifton Village a little different from any real village in 1840. But we've researched anything about this period, and Clifton Village is as authentic as possible. Now, do we want to talk about it or see it? She turned, obviously meaning for the children to follow her the rest of the way down the hall. As a troop behind her, the girl with the spectacles came towards Jessie. She was sure mean to you, the girl said, and it was a good question. I've been reading a lot about this period. People lived in really filthy conditions then, but I doubt if we see filth today. Oh, Jessie said. She could have liked to tell the girl everything and ask her all about 1996. Slavery really had been abolished, but after almost giving herself away, she knew she had to be careful. The guards weren't chasing her anymore, but there was still a danger. She wasn't allowed to relax until she told Mr. Neely about the diphtheria and got medicine for Katie and the others. My name's Nicole, the girl was saying. Nicole Stevens. My parents didn't have any imagination. There are 2 other Nicoles in my class. Oh, Jessie said again. She had never met anyone named Nicole. It was pretty. I'm Jessie. Mr. Spurring saved Jessie from having to say anything else. She stopped the group and began explaining the system of mirrors and cameras that allowed them to see everything happening above ground. They were under the village square right now. She pointed to an image of a wide stretched glass, and Jessie saw Mr. Harlow pull up his wagon to the store. It was like the pictures back on the wall of the corridor, only Mr. Harlow was moving like in real life. One of his horses was missing a shoe, and Jessie had to stop herself from yelling out to him to get it fixed. He walked into the store, seeming unaware that 30 children were watching him. Off to the side, through each of these doors, you could see what's happening in the various shops and in each of the houses. Our monitors tell us, Mrs. Bernstein glanced at a box above the group's head, there's a bread being baked at Dr. Fester's house. The potter is making bowls, and the blacksmith, ooh, you should see this. Come along. She led the children to a door marked Joseph Keister's Exquisite Blacksmith. Inside was a room with about 50 chairs, more than could fit in Pa's shop. But against one wall, full length, was a clear image of Pa bent over a horseshoe glowing red. Jessie could hear the crackle of the fire behind him and see the sweat flowing down his face. For a minute, Jessie forgot she wasn't standing in the shop herself, perhaps having stopped in after school to see Pop, but she couldn't feel the heat of the fire, and all these strangely dressed future children surrounded her. Some were snickering. Couldn't he find an easier way to do that? One boy asked. Shut up, Jessie said. He's the best. I subscribe to the bell. Thanks for watching or listening.